Turtles have been with us for a long time, over 200 million years, and we still don't know everything about them. This is a classic example of that, something people have been talking about for ages, and there's lots of misinformation around. So let's get to the bottom of this. This question comes up because of the turtle's anatomy. When they hatch, they use it to find their way to the ocean. They can also pump water over their skin to take up oxygen that way. This is called cutaneous respiration. Animals that breathe through their skin tend to be small, like salamanders, tadpoles, and earthworms. Being small helps because it means that there's a greater surface area of skin relative to the amount of oxygen you need. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not involved in breathing. Turtles could still be exchanging gases through their skin when they pump water over it. But it does suggest that the main purpose of this behavior isn't gas exchange. Instead, it might be to keep their skin moist, or to remove waste products from their skin, or to pick up chemicals that help them find food. Like we said, turtles rely on their sense of smell. Perhaps flaring their nostrils helps them smell better. When you breathe through your nose, it means that air passes over a lot more surface area inside you before it reaches your lungs compared with breathing through your mouth. That's because you've got these folds in your nose called turbinates, which massively increase the surface area. It's the same deal with turtles, except they don't have turbinates in their noses. They have these large, highly vascularized structures made of bone covered in tissue. And because they're closer to the front of the turtle's head, they're probably easier to move water over. And we already know that water moving over the turtle's head helps to move water over their skin. So if you want to improve your sense of smell, one way to do it is to make sure that air passes over as much surface area of your nose as possible before it gets to your lungs. Nostrils flaring might be one way for turtles to do that. Turtles aren't small, but they do have a lot of skin. Maybe the act of flaring out their nostrils creates more space for air to pass through. That would make it easier for the turtles to take in oxygen, especially if they're tired and their muscles are working less efficiently. It's an intriguing idea, but it's impossible to tell without actually measuring how much turtles can breathe through their backside. Well, it turns out that we still don't know. It's definitely something to do with the nostrils, though. They compared the size of the opening with the amount of air that went through it. They knew that because they measured how fast the turtles moved the water over their skin. And they assumed that the amount of air going through the opening was the same as the amount of water. What they found was that the opening was simply too small for the turtles to breathe significant amounts of air through it. So, sorry, the title of this episode is wrong. Turtles can't really breathe through their backside. If that's true, you'd expect to see movement of the skin over the turtle's head and neck when they flare their nostrils. And indeed, that's exactly what researchers saw. They looked at high-speed videos of red-eared sliders and spotted this. You can see how the skin moves over the top of the head and ripples outwards, and that effect can last for several minutes. This doesn't necessarily explain how the skin gets the oxygen. It could be simple diffusion of oxygen into the skin, but it does show that the nostril flaring behavior is doing something. If turtles don't flare their nostrils before they pump water over their skin, they can't move water across their skin effectively. Turtles don't have ears on the outside of their heads, but they can hear sounds. Sound travels through the bones of the skull and the middle ear, which is hidden under the skin behind the eye sockets. However, they wouldn't need to flare their nostrils to do that. The vibrations travel through the body anyway. And since turtles can hear without flaring their nostrils, it can't be related to hearing. They don't get much benefit from the whole thing. Even sea turtles have more skin than you'd expect for an animal of their size. So it's not hard to imagine how they manage to breathe through their skin. They also seem to use it when they're looking for food, some of them at least. The idea is that by pumping water over their skin, they're getting oxygen into their blood, but they're also getting carbon dioxide out of their blood. If that's the case, it would make sense for them to flare out these back openings. When they pump water over their skin, they're trying to speed up the gas exchange, both taking in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide. And if they can get more oxygen into their bloodstream, maybe they can use less of their energy reserves to keep swimming and pumping water. And indeed, studies have found that when turtles flare their nostrils, they use less energy while swimming. So it seems likely that the nostrils are used for smelling. But why would they need to flare them out like this to do that? To test this idea, researchers at the University of North Florida decided to put some turtles into MRI machines. They wanted to see if they could detect any differences in blood flow between the parts of the turtles with and without the flared nostrils. They were expecting that if the nostrils were somehow involved in breathing, then the blood vessels in the area should be larger because it would mean that they needed to carry more oxygen around. Well, it turned out that wasn't the case at all. The blood vessels around the nostrils were actually smaller than expected. The authors concluded that these structures may not be involved in gas exchange after all. It turns out that in some species of turtle, at least those big openings at the back end aren't just holes. They're actually connected to the lungs. That means that turtles can suck air directly into their lungs through those back openings. But it also means that there's another way that they can breathe. We've got this big sort of hole at the back end, which looks like it could be a mouth or a nose or something. But it's not. In fact, in anatomical terms, this structure is called the posterior nares. And it's basically just a big hole that leads into the nasal passages. So the answer has to be no, right? Turtles can't breathe through their backside. The air would just go straight through them and come out the other side. That makes sense? But the thing is, if that was the case, why do they have those holes? And why do they sometimes open and close them? And why do they sometimes flare them out like this guy's doing? He's actually flaring his nostrils. Look at how he does that. You can see the muscles around his eyes kind of bunching up and then pushing down, making these little flaps of skin go up. And he's got these things on his upper lip that are also moving. You can even see when he closes them. Look at how far up those flaps of skin go. It might not be just these little flaps of skin. There might be more going on here. So what we need to do is figure out what this opening does. It clearly does something. If it didn't do anything, why would evolution have kept it? A lot of animals that have evolved from ancestors that had external nostrils have lost them over time. Salamanders are like that, sharks are like that, and fish are like that too. But all of these animals still have the internal structures needed for smelling. They've just lost the outside part of it. So that suggests that the external nostrils, the posterior nares, do something important for the turtles. So let's look at what they smell. We know that turtles rely on their sense of smell. It's not the only unusual way that turtles breathe. What's harder to imagine is how breathing through their skin could help them breathe through their backside. Maybe it does. But is this really how they're getting oxygen? However, they did find evidence that suggested that the nostrils are involved in pumping water over the skin, specifically around the head and neck. So then, what's this whole breathing through your backside thing really all about? One idea is that the act of flaring the nostrils pulls water over the skin. The researchers also ruled out the possibility that it has anything to do with hearing. So we don't have a good idea of what this weird behavior is really for, but we do have some clues. Of course, we still can't rule out the possibility that it's all about breathing. To their credit, the researchers did try to estimate how much turtles breathe through their back ends. They calculated that it wouldn't be very much. In reality, these guys are probably just showing off.